The badge slipped before Kane even realized his fingers had loosened. A glint of silver spun through the dry evening air, hitting the dirt with a sound too soft for such a heavy silence. Dust swirled around it, catching the last light of a dying sun. The whole town square seemed to lean toward that small circle of metal lying in the street. And then a boot stepped forward, scuffed leather, cracked from miles of travel, pressing down close enough to claim it without crushing it. A stranger bent, his shadow long and sharp against the boards of the general store, and lifted Kane's badge from the dust. He held it up for everyone to see. "Looks like the law don't belong to him no more," the man said, voice steady, edged with a kind of confidence that made the townsfolk flinch. He pinned the silver star against his chest with 2 fingers, as if measuring how it would feel. "Maybe it belongs to me now." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Merchants by their wagons, ranch hands loitering by the hitching posts, women with baskets half raised, all froze between disbelief and dread. Nobody laughed. Nobody dared. In a town where law was thin as wire, symbols mattered more than words, and Kane's badge had always been heavier than bullets. Now it rested in the grip of a stranger. Sheriff Kane stood a few paces away, tall under his black hat, duster hanging heavy with trail dust and storm grit. His Colt .45 sat easy on his hip, pearl-handled, untouched. His steel-gray eyes locked on the badge, then on the hand that held it. For a moment, the scar along his jaw caught the dying light, the only movement in a face carved from stone. "You don't know what you're holding," Kane said finally. His voice carried low but clear, gravel and iron wrapped in silence. The stranger smiled, a lean, weather-worn man, younger by a decade, but his eyes burned with a reckless light. "Oh, I reckon I do. This here's power. Whoever wears it makes the rules. Ain't that right, Sheriff?" The word, sheriff, hung in the air like a dare. Kane didn't answer. He could feel the weight of every watching eye, the whole town wondering what he'd do. His hand twitched once near his revolver, then stilled. A gust of wind rattled the empty gallows at the end of the street, the chains clinking like ghostly laughter. The stranger fastened the badge onto his coat. The star caught firelight from the saloon lamps, flickering alive behind him. "Seems like the law's just changed hands." Someone gasped. Someone else whispered, "God help us." But Kane only stood there, the brim of his hat shadowing his face. His silence was heavier than any shout. The moment stretched until it felt like the whole square would snap beneath it. Then Kane turned, not toward the stranger, but toward the jailhouse. He walked slow, boots crunching in the dust, never looking back. The crowd parted for him like a river bending around a boulder. It was worse than if he'd drawn and fired. Kane's silence, his turning away, carried more dread than a gunshot. Behind him, the stranger's voice rang out, triumphant. "Law ain't in the man, it's in the badge, and I've got it now." The crowd erupted, not with cheers, not with protest, but with uneasy whispers. Kane disappeared into the dim mouth of the jailhouse, and the door shut like a coffin lid. Inside, darkness settled over him. The walls smelled of gun oil, whiskey, and the faint ghost of blood that never quite left a cell. Kane sank into the chair at his desk. His hand hovered over the empty spot on his vest, where the badge used to sit. His fingers twitched like a man groping for a wound that wasn't there. For the first time in years, Sheriff Kane looked bare. Just another man with a gun, stripped of the star that had once meant he stood between order and chaos. He could still feel the grit where the badge had slipped from his hand, the way the dust had swallowed it whole. His jaw clenched. The memory of his wife and son rose unbidden. 2 graves back in sun-bleached soil, taken in a revenge fire when Kane had trusted the wrong men. The badge had been his penance, his armor against guilt, the only thing that made sense in a world of ruin. Without it, what was left? He lit a lamp, the flame flaring sharp and throwing long shadows. The light caught the iron bars of the cells, bending across the floor like black chains. Kane leaned back, eyes hard. Somewhere outside, laughter drifted from the saloon. The stranger's voice mixed with it, bold and loud, testing how far the town's fear would carry him. Hours later, the street had emptied into night. A storm brewed on the horizon, thunder muttering like distant cannons. Kane stood at the window of the jail, watching lightning split the desert sky. The stranger paced the boardwalk outside the saloon, badge glinting under lantern light, outlaws drifting closer to him with each passing hour. Kane's hand rested on his revolver. He could end this with a single shot. But another thought gnawed at him. If Law lived only in a badge, then maybe the stranger was right. Maybe Kane had been hiding behind silver and not justice all along. The storm wind howled down Main Street, carrying grit that stung like needles. Kane turned from the window, the echo of his own words whispering back at him, "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." Tonight, he wasn't sure which one he still carried. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the town square, and in that split-second glare, Kane saw the stranger standing dead center, badge gleaming, arms spread as if daring the heavens themselves. The thunder rolled after, shaking the jailhouse walls. Kane's pulse slowed to a cold, deliberate beat. This wasn't finished, not by a long shot. The storm broke, rain hammering the rooftops, washing dust into mud. And as it did, Kane whispered to the empty room, "You picked up more than you can carry, stranger." The sound of his voice, low and final, was swallowed by the roar of the storm. The storm had rolled on by morning, leaving the town square washed clean, puddles reflecting a pale sun. But what lingered wasn't rain. It was unease, thick as smoke. Men who had once nodded to Sheriff Kane now looked over their shoulders. Women fetching water at the well spoke in whispers, as if the dust itself might carry their words back to him. In every corner of town the question weighed heavier than gunmetal. Was Kane still the law? Or had the silver badge passed to another? The stranger wasted no time answering for them. By noon he stood outside the saloon, boots planted wide, the silver star pinned brazen on his chest. His voice carried over the boardwalks and down the main street like a preacher giving sermon. "Law ain't flesh and bone," he declared. "Law is the star, and I carry it now." A handful of cowhands, fresh from cards and whiskey, nodded along. Others listened warily, shifting uneasily at the boldness of his claim. But no one stepped forward to contradict him. Kane's silence the night before had been louder than any bullet. Sheriff Kane watched from across the street, shadowed beneath the porch of the jailhouse. He leaned against the post, arms folded, gray eyes unreadable. He'd spent the night replaying the moment over and over, the badge slipping from his hand, the stranger's boot pressing the dirt, the crowd holding its breath as if the world itself had turned. If law was a symbol, then maybe it had. Inside the jail, the cells sat empty. The iron bars gleamed in the weak light, casting long cage-like stripes across the floorboards. Kane had run his fingers across them at dawn, cold to the touch. "Law ain't always justice," he'd muttered to himself, the words sour in his mouth. But when he tried to picture justice without the badge, all he saw was dust and silence. Now, watching the stranger, he felt the line blur between silence and surrender. By mid-afternoon, the stranger had gathered a small circle. Outlaws drifting from the outskirts, a drifter or two who smelled of cheap whiskey and gun oil, even a merchant who'd been fined by Kane for shorting weights at the scales, all stood near, listening as he spun tales about how Kane had grown old, tired, too haunted to hold the town together. "You folks been living under a shadow," the stranger said, his tone smooth as polished stone, a man with blood on his hands, hiding behind silver and a gun. "But me?" He tapped the badge with 2 fingers, making the metal glint in the sun. "I don't hide. I carry the law in the open, where it belongs." The crowd shifted. No cheers, no jeers, just the restless weight of doubt. A boy no older than 12 whispered loud enough for Kane to hear, "Is he sheriff now?" His mother hushed him quick, but the words cut deeper than a bullet. Toward evening, the saloon doors banged open, and Deputy Mallory staggered into the street. He was a man of soft chin and nervous eyes, loyal more to whiskey than to Kane, but the badge on his vest still held weight. "That star don't belong to you, stranger," Mallory slurred, waving a trembling finger. "Belongs to the sheriff, always has, always will." The stranger smiled like a wolf eyeing a lamb. "Funny, don't see it on him now, do you?" Laughter rippled through the drifters around him, mean-spirited and sharp. Mallory flushed red, his hand twitching toward his revolver. Kane stepped forward then, voice cutting through the heat like cold iron. "Put your hand down, Mallory." The deputy froze, sweat rolling down his temple. Kane's voice carried a command that years of silence hadn't dulled. Mallory dropped his hand and backed away, shame stinging his cheeks. The stranger tilted his head, studying Kane across the muddy street. "So, Sheriff, you'll stop your own man, but not me." He tapped the badge again, grinning wide enough to show the gap between his teeth. "Your silence is your answer," the crowd murmured. Kane said nothing. "I did." That night, the saloon swelled with noise, cards slapped on tables, boots stomping to fiddle music, mugs crashing against wood. But beneath the laughter lurked a new rhythm, men drinking to the stranger's name, not Kane's. From the upstairs window of the jail, Kane watched lamplight flicker across faces too eager for change, too quick to bend to symbols instead of truth. His jaw clenched hard enough to ache. Inside his office, he pulled open the desk drawer. An old pocket watch lay there beside a folded letter, his wife's handwriting, faded with years. He read it again, the word burned into him long ago. "When you wear that star, remember, it means more than you. It means safety for those who can't fight, hope for those who can't run." He shut the drawer with a snap. Outside, laughter rolled like thunder through the night air. By dawn, the town had shifted on its axis. The stranger strode freely down Main Street, badge gleaming, outlaws trailing him like dogs behind a butcher. He stopped by the blacksmith's forge, laid a hand on the man's shoulder, and declared the next set of horseshoes taxed by law. When the blacksmith balked, the stranger's men reached for their pistols. The blacksmith paid. At the general store, he announced new fees for protection. Some resisted, but the sight of the silver badge silenced argument. By noon, half the town had bent beneath the weight of a false law. Kane walked the boardwalk, boots heavy, eyes unreadable. No one met his gaze, not out of disrespect, out of fear. Fear that the law might no longer stand with him. The gallows at the edge of town swayed gently in the wind. Chains rattled, a hollow echo across the square. Kane paused there, staring at the weathered wood. The badge had once given him the right to hang men by law's decree. Now another man carried that symbol, and the rope seemed to whisper that maybe it would be his own neck next. By evening, the stranger stood in the middle of the square, calling out for Kane. His voice rang sharp, bouncing off the false front buildings like a hammer on iron. "Sheriff, the people want to know who holds the law. You gonna let this town rot in silence, or you gonna speak?" Windows creaked open, doors swung wide. The whole town leaned on the edge of the moment. Kane stepped into the square, coat whipping in the rising wind, eyes locked on the man who wore his badge. For a breath, the two men faced each other, the rightful sheriff and the pretender, both standing tall beneath a sky bruised with stormlight. The stranger raised his arms, silver badge gleaming. "Say it plain, Kane. Is the law still yours, or is it mine?" The crowd fell deathly quiet. Kane's hand hovered near his revolver, but his eyes slid toward the badge glinting in the fading light. He said nothing. The silence cracked like glass. Gasps, whispers, muttered curses rolled through the square. The stranger's grin widened until it looked carved into his face. "Then it's settled," he said, voice echoing with triumph. "The law is mine." Morning light broke thin and colorless over Bootjack Ridge, dragging a pale ribbon across the town's small cemetery. Sheriff Kane stood hat in hand before two sun-bleached markers that faced the wind. The storm had rinsed the world clean, but mud clung to his boots and to the words cut into the wood. He didn't read them. He knew every letter by the way the knife had bitten that day. His hand shaking, the blade catching once on the grain, the wind carrying the taste of smoke. Somewhere below, hammers sounded, hollow, measured, sure. The gallows chains answered with a faint clink, as if the town itself was practicing a death sentence. Kane lifted his gaze. From the cemetery ridge, the street looked small enough to pocket. A child's model of a town, a saloon blinking lamplight in daylight, a crooked church, a courthouse that had given up on justice long ago and leaned into its rot. In the square, the stranger moved like a bright nail in raw wood, the stolen silver badge flickering under the sun. Kane slid his thumb along the scar at his jaw. In the lampless theater of his mind, the old film started on its own. Brittle edges, smoke on the reel. It was the sound of a door, not the swallow-soft click of a careful hand. A kick, wood crying out. He'd been oiling the colt when the boy's carved horse clattered from the table and rolled to the hearth. Shadows rushed the room with the smell of pine pitch and bad whiskey. 3 men, masks the color of soot, and a 4th in a black vest who didn't hide his face at all. The man in the vest smiled. "Drop the star, Kane. Badges don't stop fire." The world narrowed to lampglass tremble, to the silver badge catching heat, to his wife's breath snagging in her throat. He had said it then, the line that always came before something that couldn't be undone. Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me. Gunfire peeled the air. The boy cried, "Pa!" Too bright a sound in the smoke. The first man went down, knocking a chair to flinders. The second buckled into the stove with a noise like an animal getting hurt far away. The third stepped in the fume, muzzle blossom white, and Kane felt the wind of that bullet across his cheek. Glass and lamp oil went. Fire took the room. In the brief sunburst of flame, He saw the black-vested man's mouth shape 2 words, "Oh me." And then the man was gone, boots hammering through their doorway into the dark. The film snapped. Kane stood by the graves again, jaw hard enough to hurt, every nerve holding the last frame. A lamp's reflection in a man's smiling teeth, and the kiss of heat on the badge, heat that notched its edge forever. Down in the square, the snap of hammers bled into the smaller sounds, nails finding grain, curses bitten off, the lift and drop of heavy timber, a rope dragged, leaving a faint trail in wet dust, like a snake's belly. Kane set his hat on. The wind came up with sage on it. He talked to the wood because the dead didn't need words. "I'll not hide behind silver," he said, "not if it means leaving folks to wolves." He turned and walked down the hill. The jailhouse held the night even at noon. Bars threw black ladders across the floor. Kane lit a lamp, flame swelling then calming to a steady wick. He set the glass down, as careful as a prayer. He opened the bottom drawer and lifted a small tin, his wife's, blue enamel chipped at the rim. Inside lay a locket on a rawhide thong, and the backing stud from his badge, the little metal disc warm from memory. He turned the disc with the pad of his thumb. The edge had a shallow bite in it, the twin to the notch in the missing star. Bootsteps scuffed across the porch. A hard, quick knock. Then a pause like whoever stood outside was measuring their own courage. "Come on," Kane said. The door pushed in. Ruth Carver, a rancher's widow, ducked into the light, dust on her hem, jaw set against breaking. A girl trailed her, Apache, 15 at most, with a ribbon of dried blood at her hairline and a look that watched every corner. "Sheriff," Ruth said, voice low but steady, "we're much obliged for your time." Kane's eyes flicked to the mark on the girl's temple. "Name?" "Lena," the girl said. She didn't blink. Ruth swallowed. "Men came this morning, the one wearing your star and 2 more with him. Said there's a protection levy now, $2 per head of cattle and $1 on my well. I told him I paid my taxes at the county last month. He said those were old law." Kane's jaw worked once. "Did you pay?" "Not a cent." She lifted her palm. Purple finger marks shadowed the skin near her wrist. "I reckon they thought to take it out of me." Lena stepped between. Kane looked at the girl. She stared back. "He touch you?" "Not twice," Lena said. Lena reached into the pocket of her skirt and slid a folded paper onto the desk. Ink bled where rain had laced it. Kane read the hand, the flourishes too fine for a cow town. By authority vested in the badge, Sheriff Pro Tem Malachi Vale institutes special levies for order and safety. The signature curled like smoke. Vale. The name crawled. Kane turned to his ledger, bottom shelf, a thickness of old paper like cooled lard. He flipped, stopped, held his finger on a line that had not seen daylight in a decade. Malachi Vale, deputy, revoked. Conduct unbecoming, brutality, discharged by Judge Sam Tolliver, sealed on petition. The date under it was a bad year, the ink the color of dried blood. Vale, black vest in a different town, smooth tongue in a different bar room, a man who didn't hide his face when ruin was afoot. Kane shut the ledger. Dust motes turned in the lamplight, slow as snow. "Sheriff," Ruth said. He swore he'd hang somebody by sundown to prove a point. Said law ignored ain't law at all. He spoke Ephraim Pike's name. Said Ephraim cussed him at the forge. Kane saw the blacksmith's hands in his mind, rope calloused, iron burned, steady as a judge's. "He'll hang a man to nail his star to this town," Kane said. Ruth's mouth tightened. "I don't much care who wears the badge, long as my boy can walk to the well without being handled, but I'll be damned if I watch a good man dance for a thief." Kane looked at the empty place on his vest, where the star had ridden all these years. He set the disc back in the tin, shut the lid, and the little click sounded like a verdict. He crossed to the gun rack and lifted the Winchester. The weight found its old groove on his palm. "Lena," he said, not turning, "you got kin here." She shook her head once. "Then you'll stand by Ruth Carver till dark. You don't leave sight of her boy, not for bread nor prayer. You hear me?" "Yes," Lena said, and the word had more iron in it than some men's oaths. "You both keep to the back alley," he said. "Fewer eyes, fewer rifles. If you hear the bell—" "What then?" Ruth asked. "Keep walking," Kane said. He cut across the yard, hat brim low. Near the courthouse, the air tasted of old paper and mouse leavings. The building had once dreamed of a second story. It had settled for a sag in the roof and windows that blinked out and back when the wind shoved at them. Two of Vale's men were wrestling a crossbeam into place where the judge's bench had been. The beam's end knocked loose a shower of plaster dust. It twinkled in the sun like the inside of a church. Kane stepped into the doorway. Neither man noticed at first. The nearer one, beard like a rag, eyes like marbles, caught sight of him and went white around the mouth. "Well, hell," the other one said, trying for a grin. "Look it, the ghost himself." Kane gave the room a long look. The benches scarred with knife letters, the law books mildewed down to pulp, the place where verdicts had once had teeth. The crossbeam shuddered into its saddles. Rope hissed as it slid, a quiet or eager sound. "You boys mean to use that rope lawful?" Kane asked. The bearded man's hand snuck toward his belt. Kane lifted the Winchester a finger's breadth. "Count to 10 before you reach leather," he said. "If you get to 8, that'll be your best day." The hand froze. The man licked his lips and smiled a losing smile. "By thunder, Sheriff, you ain't got your star." "I never needed it to shoot straight," Kane said. Bootsteps scuffed on the boardwalk behind him. Vale's voice carried in, smooth as poured coffee. "Gentlemen," he said, "I don't believe I asked the relic to bless our housewarming." Kane didn't turn. "You turn a court into a gallows and call it an improvement." "Call it efficiency," Vale said. "Judge Tolliver's riding in by sundown to swear me. Paper to make your ghost official." Paper. Tolliver. The name rang like a hammer on a nail. The old judge who'd discharged Vale. Now come to bless him? The thought tasted rotten, or bought. Kane turned then and saw it up close. The notch on the silver star catching a breath of sun under the courthouse eave. The same bite of metal he could find by feel in the dark. The badge glinted on Vale's chest like a lie pinned to a suit. Vale read the stare. "Pretty thing, isn't it? I reckon it sits better on a man who'll actually use it." "The last man who said that lit my house," Kane said. His voice didn't change. The air moved around it. A horse screamed outside, hard, sudden. The square hushed the way a room does when a preacher forgets his line. Then the bell at the church pulled itself, once, twice. Folks' feet brought them without thinking. Vale smiled, showing small, neat teeth. "Right on time," he said. They brought Ephraim Pike between them, wrists lashed with iron chain, shirt ripped, beard damp from where they'd shoved his face in a trough. He walked like a man doing sums. The chain kissed the courthouse step with a thin ring, and the sound climbed Kane's spine like cold. Ephraim saw Kane in the doorway and met his eyes, not pleading, not angry, just a man looking at another to see what held. "Sheriff," Ephraim said, and he put the whole town's history in the word. Kane felt the choice rise like a dry wind, badge or no badge, law or the thing that law was born to serve. Vale turned to the crowd. "By the power of the star," he said, tapping it so it flashed, "Bootjack Ridge now exercises order." The blacksmith refused levy and raised hand against an officer. Sentence: hanging. A murmur skittered through the watchers, thin and frightened and hungry for someone else's decision. Kane lifted the Winchester a hair. Vale's eyes found the movement like a hawk finds a field mouse. "You going to make a spectacle without your jewelry?" Vale asked softly. "Or will you stand there and let the town see how small you are without shine?" The rope swung down. The noose turned on its own, a little lazy carousel, hunting a neck. Kane set his boots in the doorway like posts. Rainwater ticked from the beam onto the floor, each drop a counted second. Outside, the bell raised its voice. 1, 2, 3. The girl Lena's face flickered in the crowd, chin high, eyes fixed on him as if the river, the cattle, the sky itself might answer to what he did next. Kane breathed out and felt the world narrow to a trigger and 2 inches of travel. The noose settled across Ephraim Pike's shoulder like a hand that had mistaken its place. "Easy," Vale told his men. "We'll set it right." Kane took a single step forward, and Vale nodded once. 5 rifles lifted in the windows of the building across the street, barrels black as wells, all of them aimed into the courthouse door. Kane saw the glint, oil, steel, quiet purpose, cut from shadow to light. 5 rifles stared from the courthouse windows like cold eyes, their black maws fixed on the doorway where Kane stood. The noose swung lazy overhead, brushing Ephraim Pike's shoulder as if the rope itself were curious. Dust hovered in the light like ash. Outside, the wind pushed grit through the door crack. It hissed along the floorboards, a sound just loud enough to count a man's heartbeat. Kane's finger eased off the Winchester's trigger. He took in the angles, gunmen in the sash windows, one on the balcony rail, Vale in the center with that bent silver star burning on his chest. If Kane fired, 5 answers would chew him hollow. Ephraim would dance an inch off the floor. Innocence here would die for nothing but pride. "Hold," he said, voice low enough to make men lean in. Then louder, "No one swings till a judge sees daylight." Vale tipped his head, amused. "A judge is coming, old law. You'll get your daylight." "Then lower that rope," Kane told him, eyes flat as hammered steel. "You hang a blacksmith before the ink's dry. Folks'll know what kind of order you mean." For a breath, the room wobbled between 2 futures. Vale gestured and the noose lifted an inch farther from Ephraim's neck. Relief mixed with shame in the crowd. Someone exhaled like a prayer. The rifles didn't blink. Kane stepped back to the door jamb, letting the muzzle of his rifle point at the floorboards. He tasted iron where he'd bitten the inside of his cheek. "This ain't justice, it's theater." "Then enjoy the show," Vale said, smiling with too many teeth. "By sundown, Judge Tolliver will swear me. By nightfall, Bootjack Ridge will be right as rain." "Right as a graveyard," muttered Ephraim, chin high though his wrists were chained. The chains chirred like angry birds when he moved. Kane met his eyes, a small nod passing between men who had done hard work with their hands and bled for it. Then Kane left the threshold. Outside, the wind had shifted east. It carried the smell of horses, hot rope, and fear. By afternoon, the town had learned to walk around the badge rather than through it. Vale's men posted a list on the livery wall with a nail the size of a thumb. Special levies for order and safety. The words looked neat, as if they'd been copied from a school slate. The collecting looked nothing like school. At the blacksmith's, 2 of Vale's men poured horseshoes into a canvas sack and called it bond. At the general store, the ledger man, thin, nervous, handed over coin while his wife stood very still, eyes fixed on the star, as if the light off it might blind her to what her hands were doing. Kane walked the boardwalk with his hat brim low, reading the new angles of faces that had once met him square. Men stopped talking when he passed. Women measured him, then the badge across the street, then their children. A boy of 12 whispered, "Is he sheriff now?" And no one answered because the wind might carry a wrong answer to the wrong ear. Deputy Mallory posted himself outside the saloon and polished his own small tin badge, as if friction could produce backbone. Vale drifted by, clapped him on the shoulder, and spoke in a voice gentle enough for a funeral. Mallory's eyes slid to the courthouse, then to Kane, then to his own boots. He swallowed. When Vale moved on, Mallory stayed where he was like a post someone forgot to dig up. Lena, the Apache girl, ghosted near Kane's elbow without being seen until she meant it. The faint cut at her hairline had scabbed black. Her eyes were bright and dry. "You were right," she said, voice barely a breath, unnoticed over the wind-tapped saloon sign. The star's edge, a small bite. Her fingers shaped a crescent in the air. Not new? Old? Kane's jaw twitched. The backing stud in his tin had a notch you could find blind in the dark. He said nothing. He only listened, and his fingers made a slow circle, as if rolling a coin. Only there was no coin to roll, just air and memory. "Judge comes," she added. "Dust trail to the south. 2 riders, one with papers, one with a rifle who looks at the paper more than the road." "Good eyes," Kane said. "I learned to count wolves," she answered. He wanted to tell her to stay away from the square. He wanted to tell her to run. Instead, he said, "If something rattles loose, you bring it to me." She nodded once and was gone, the crowd closing behind her the way grass hides a snake trail. Toward 4 o'clock, heat shimmering off the hardpan turned the road south into a mirage banded with light. Through it came a buggy rattling with white dust, a black bonnet, and a stiff old man under it, cuffs too clean for this town. Behind, a rider with a long rifle in a saddle scabbard watched the judge's papers more than the judge's back. Tolliver arrived like a sermon not everyone asked to hear, the law in spectacles, flinching at flies. Vale stepped into the street with his hands raised, smiling like a bridegroom. "Judge Tolliver," he called, "Bootjack Ridge welcomes you to order." The judge descended badly. His boot heel slid on the last step. The rifleman steadied him with 2 fingers and no warmth. Tolliver peered through dust at Kane, blinked hard, then looked anywhere else. "You remember me," Kane said softly when the judge got near the courthouse doors. "You remember what you signed 10 years ago. Deputy Malachi Vale, revoked, conduct unbecoming. Your hand shook when you wrote it." Tolliver's mouth clacked once, a dry hinge. "Times change," he said, but the words had to climb over shame to leave him. He reached for his satchel like a drowning man for a board. Papers whispered. A seal winked red under the dust. Vale's smile widened. "Special appointment for a county in times of distress," he announced. "Pro tem authority to stabilize and secure until election. You know how it is, Sheriff. Emergencies." Kane watched the red wax tremble as Tolliver unfolded the appointment. The seal bore a mark he knew, Black Rock Assay Office, the same fancy stamp the mine men used when they paid bribes in envelopes, a tiny pick and shovel crossed like bones, not the governor's seal, not proper, foreshadow of rot. Kane filed it in the drawer behind his eyes. "By this paper," Tolliver said, voice thinning, "Malachi Vale is empowered to—" "Steal whatever isn't nailed down," the general store's wife whispered. But she set it into her hand, and her hand didn't carry. "Judge," Kane said, cutting in like a knife that knew where to go. "You swear him now. He'll kill Pike by supper to prove a point. Don't let your pen write a man's last breath." Tolliver's jaw worked. He looked at the rope, then at the crowd, then at the rifle muzzles yawning from his brand-new courthouse windows. The rider behind him shifted, leather creaking. Vale's men smiled with their eyes, and nothing else. "Lower your rifle," Vale told the balcony gunman without looking up. "We keep this tidy." The barrel dipped 2 finger widths. The message was still loud enough to hear. "We can put it back any time we please." Mallory cleared his throat. It sounded like a man trying to cough up a lie. "Sure," he began, then swallowed the word whole when Vale's gaze slid over him like a shovel over dirt. Kane looked at Ephraim Pike. Mud on his beard, iron on his wrists, dignity still standing. He weighed pride and blood on the scale he kept in his chest. He'd shot men for less harm than Vale had done by noon. He'd killed quicker for uglier reasons. He could knock Vale down now. Maybe he'd live through the first volley. Maybe Lena would die in the second. He holstered the Winchester with a click that sounded too loud. "Judge," he said, "I'll trade you." A ripple went through the square. Vale's smile thinned to wire. "I go in irons," Kane said, stepping between Vale and Pike. "Hold me in your nice new jail. Hear him in the morning when your head's clear and your ink is dry. If the law is what you say it is, it can wait 12 hours. If it can't, you're not holding a court. You're holding a circus." Tolliver stared at him as if men didn't do that in the world he remembered. The crowd stared because they'd forgotten men still could. Vale's tongue pressed slow against his teeth, thinking. Then, "Tie him." 2 of Vale's men approached, iron in their hands. The cuffs were cold on Kane's wrists. They fit too well. A craftsman's work meant to last. The chain between them kissed when he moved. The courthouse smelled like old paper and new sweat when they walked him inside. The law books on the shelf had swollen from last night's storm and dried crooked. "Don't," Mallory whispered when Kane passed him. It wasn't a plea. It was a confession. "Watch the girl," Kane said back, never looking at him. They sat Kane on the witness bench like a display, iron bright against his dust-dark coat. Vale positioned himself where the light found his star. He lifted his hand. "Judge." Tolliver cleared his throat, unfolded the paper again, and read from it as if the reading made it true. He raised his right hand. Vale mirrored like a churchgoer. Outside, a hawk circled in the blank hot sky. It made a small shadow that crossed the rope noose, then the judge's face, then the star on Vale's chest. When the shadow passed over the star, it found the notch at the edge, one tooth of metal that didn't belong. Lena's eyes followed it, like a cat follows a moth. "Repeat after me," Tolliver said, voice barely his own. I, Malachi Vale, do swear. Hold, Kane said again. He stood. The chain bit his wrists. Iron chimed the room. He looked at Tolliver, not Vale. Before you swear a man with a thief's notch on another man's star, ask yourself what you fear, Judge. The truth, or him. Tolliver flinched like a man struck. His eyes darted to the badge. He saw it then. Tiny as a hangnail, brightened as a sin. Vale didn't flinch. He smiled with his lips closed, wolf calm, and flicked 2 fingers. The balcony rifles lifted again. The room breathed in and didn't breathe out. Vale leaned close enough that Kane could smell his tooth powder. You talk pretty for a relic, he murmured. Tonight we hang a blacksmith or a sheriff. Either way, the town learns. Law ain't always justice, Kane said quietly, the old line coming like a bullet he'd loaded years ago. His eyes never left Vale's. But justice rides with me. Vale's smile didn't reach his eyes. Make sure she keeps up. He turned to the crowd and raised the star to the light as if it were a chalice. At sunset, he announced, Bootjack Ridge chooses between its past and its future. The wind came through the broken pane, tasting of sage and storm coming back. Somewhere behind the courthouse, the bell rope creaked. One slow pull, then another. Lina melted up the stairs without anyone seeing her move. Mallory took a half step he couldn't explain to himself. Judge Tolliver's hand shook so badly the paper rasped. On the street, men began building a platform, planks thudding onto sawhorses, hammers striking, the sound of a wooden future rising fast. The sun sagged toward the false fronts, like a blade finding its sheath. Heat held to the boards and ropes, to men's collars, to women's palms knotted white around their own skirts. In the courthouse, the air smelled of mouse dust and hemp. Sheriff Kane sat in irons on the witness bench, chain bright against his trail-dark coat. The Winchester stood on the rack out of reach, a long shadow on mildewed law books that leaned like drunks. Malachi Vale faced the crowd with that silver star cocked on his chest, the notch at its edge catching light when he turned. Judge Tolliver fumbled his spectacles and shook parchment as though rattling the paper would drive out doubt. The rider who'd escorted him, hat low, rifle slung, watched the room the way a coyote watches a sheep pen. Let's have it tidy, Vale said, voice smooth as poured molasses. The oath, Judge. Give this town its due. Outside, hammers beat a hard rhythm. Planks thudded into place. The rope squeaked as it settled, the loop turning lazy above the courthouse steps. Yarum Pike's name hanging in it, like breath in winter. From the back stair, Lina melted into the gallery shadows, small as a whisper. No one watched a girl who learned to move like smoke. Her bare soles found the steps without asking a board to complain. Up in the clerk's loft, where the windows wore webs and the sun slanted in like church light, she crouched. Papers lay in a leather folio, stamped red with a neat little seal. Pick and shovel crossed like bones. Blackrock Assay Office. She didn't read letters well, but she knew marks and money. She knew lists of names, too. She traced a finger along a line, lips shaping them soundless. Carver, Pike, Ward. Beside each name, a number walked in a column, then a word even she could feel in her bones. Clearance. She slid the folio under her skirt, tied the sash tight, and slipped back down the shadows like a prayer no one heard. In the well of the court, Tolliver raised a trembling hand. "Repeat after me," he managed, voice fighting its way through dust. "I, Malachi Vale." Kane stood. The chain rang the room like a spoon on a glass. "Hold," he said, and the word found every ear. He turned not to Vale, but to Tolliver. Judge, you remember when your hand scratched a line through his name? 10 years back. You wrote, revoked, with your mouth stuck full of shame. If your hand is to swear a man now, look the star in the eye you're blessing. Vale's smile was a slit. We parade trinkets now. Sit down, relic. Kane lifted his cuffed hands. This isn't sermon, and it isn't trinket. Night my house burned. That star took heat. I felt it notch under my thumb. The fire bit it and left its tooth. I found the backing stud in the ash by morning. He nodded at Tolliver. It's in my desk. Drawer with the blue tin. Stud fits that star like a key in a lock. You swear him while he's wearing my badge. You swear a thief. A murmur slid through the pews. Men shifted. The rider by the door looked from the badge to Kane to the judge, calculation fencing his face. Vale chuckled without heat. You want me to unpin, Sheriff, so you can make speeches while I hold it up to candlelight? Take it off, Kane said. Let the hand that swears test the metal. Tolliver glanced at the star and saw the tiny bite, bright as a sin. Something old and decent moved in his face. He lowered the paper. Mr. Vale, he said carefully, the court requires nothing I don't allow. Vale murmured, and his eyes cut to the balcony. Muzzles in the windows tilted an inch. The room held its breath. A whisper brushed Kane's elbow. Lena. She slid a chip of blue enamel into his palm, the tin from his drawer. He felt the stud inside by touch alone, edges familiar as a scar. The chain bit his wrists as he lifted the tin toward Tolliver. Take it, Kane said. You can lie to men. Metal doesn't lie. For a long second, the old man didn't move. Then the rider with the rifle took one step, slow, deliberate, and plucked the tin from Kane's cuffs. He opened it with a click that sounded like a small verdict. The stud lay there, worn smooth where a thumb had known it a long time. Judge, the rider said, flat voice not unfriendly. Do your job. Tolliver's fingers were clumsy but careful. Mr. Vale, he said, a touch more spine behind the spectacles now. Unfasten the star. Vale didn't move. By thunder, someone muttered in the back. A woman's voice followed it, low and urgent. Give him nothing that's yours. Kane's mouth twisted. It was never his. For the first time, a thread of anger creased Vale's smoothness. He flicked open the pin and lifted the badge away from his coat, holding it between thumb and finger. The notch flashed. The room leaned in the way fields lean toward rain. Tolliver reached, hands shaking like wind in cotton. The rider intercepted and set the star in the judge's palm with 2 fingers, careful as a midwife. Tolliver brought it up close enough that his breath fogged the metal. He set the stud into the center boss and turned. It took with a soft little bite, thread into thread. It seated and held true. The judge's eyes went wide behind the glass. By God, he breathed, period honesty burning through the dust. It's the same star. The noise that went through the room wasn't a cheer. It was a sound men make when a lie they wanted to believe goes lame under them. Ruth Carver stepped from the crowd, chin high, folio in her hands now. Lena must have passed it off like a lit coal. Judge, Ruth called, voice steady as fence wire. There's more. She opened the leather and let papers spill like doves shot out of a hat. Receipts slid across the scarred table. Tidy lines, red seal. BlackRock Assay Office. Disbursement to M. Vale. Clearance operations. Kerosene. Wages. gratuity. Dates stared up like eyes. One of them was the night Kane's wife and boy went to bone and ash. The seal, Kane said softly, not the governor's, a mine's. They bought him to sweep folks off water and grass. He wore a badge when it helped. He kept mine when it pleased him. He lifted his chin, and he lit my house because I told Black Rock they'd get water over my dead back. All the lamplight seemed to lean on Vale, making his black vest slick and small at once. For a heartbeat, his smile tore, and something vicious and plain looked out. "Judge," the rider said, not taking eyes off Vale, "that's bribery, arson, murder, impersonation. Don't list it," Vale said, quiet as a snake. He didn't look at the rider. He didn't have to. 2 fingers cut the air. The balcony rifles came up as one. The muzzles found new lines. Tolliver, Ruth, the tin in the judge's hand. Men in the pews drew breath, like men about to dive. "Any man moves," Vale said. "We hang 3. The blacksmith to keep the promise, the relic for show, and a widow, for example." Deputy Mallory swallowed loud enough to hear. Sweat clung to his lip. His hand crept toward his revolver and trembled there, the way a dog trembles between heel and run. He looked at Kane, then at Lena, then at Ruth's throat, white in the dim. Kane saw the choice sign itself across a dozen faces, law as paper, law as steel, law as a woman's pulse under a rope. He stepped forward, and the chain snagged. Iron sang a small, bright note. "Malachi," he said. The name flattened in his mouth. "Look at me." Vale didn't. He watched the room with the detached care of a butcher choosing where to start. "Look at me," Kane said again. Those cold eyes of his cut through dust and panic. "You lit my house. You took my boy's noise out of the world. You wore my star like a trophy." He tipped his chin at the badge in Tolliver's hand. "You wanted this town to believe law is a glitter and a rope. But all you've got is fear." Vale's gaze slid over, slow. "Fear does the job," he said. "It's cheaper than bullets." Kane breathed in once, deep, and the sound was like a man priming a pump. "Then you're about to overpay." Ruth moved before sense could catch her. Maybe it was the papers in her fist. Maybe the thought of her boy at the well. Maybe just a rage too old to be named. She reached, fast as a striking hen, and snatched the star from Tolliver's shock-still hand. Lena was already moving, kicking a stool into the knees of the nearest rifleman. His shot went wild, chewing a calendar month out of the wall. The room detonated into screams and splinters. The badge skittered across the floor, ringing like a coin. It spun once, twice, a tiny planet choosing a sun. Mallory drew, finally, blessedly, and leveled at Vale's heart. "Stand down," he barked, and his voice broke like a dam. "Hang them!" Vale roared. On the steps outside, the block dropped. The rope snapped tight like a whip. The crowd's shout collapsed into one raw sound as the platform gave. Kane lunged, irons tearing his wrists raw, but a rifle butt smashed his shoulder and shoved him back into the dock. The rope outside groaned under weight. Someone swung against the sky. In the flicker of lamplight and smoke, the star finished its spin and came to rest at Kane's boot, the notched point touching the toe of his dust-black boot like a needle to a vein. The first scream came from the street. Not a word, just the wet sound a throat makes when rope takes its wind. Gunfire answered inside the courthouse, shots slashing paper and plaster, windows coughing white dust. The silver star spun by Kane's boot, one bright coin, choosing sides with each flicker. He didn't choose the star. Kane lunged toward the doorway, iron biting his wrists, and shouldered past the man who'd clubbed him. The rifle butt clipped his jaw. Black light burst in his skull. He went through it like he had gone through fire once, boots hammering, vision tunneled to a single, swinging shape, framed by daylight. Ephraim Pike dangled 2 steps down from heaven, boots scrabbling at empty inches, beard jerking like a hooked fish. The new gallows creaked. The hinge block had already fallen. The knot was high and ugly. Kane moved without thinking. He brought his cuffed hands together, chained tight as a bowstring, and drove them up under Ephraim's ribs. The impact knocked the blacksmith's breath back into him and lifted him a thumb from the noose. Kane's shoulders burned. His wrists screamed. The rope sang. "Knife!" Kane snarled. Lena was there before sense could answer. Small and fast, a sliver of steel already in her hand. She ran up the rail like a cat in a barn and slashed at the taut hemp. The first cut shaved hair. The second bit deep. On the third, the rope hissed and parted, fibers spitting into the heat. Ephraim crashed to the boards in a hard tangle and rolled, gagging, clutching the purple groove on his neck. "By God," he wheezed. "Save thanks," Kane said, hauling him toward the side rail with one shoulder. "Breathe." Behind them, the courthouse detonated again. Vale's men spilled through the door like hornets, muzzles first. The crowd scattered, then surged, fear learning it had legs. Ruth Carver planted herself on the steps, folio clutched to her chest, eyes bright and dry. Deputy Mallory stood mid-porch, revolver half raised, mouth open like a man using both hands to hold a prayer he didn't know the words for. "Stand down," Mallory croaked. Vale stepped into the doorway. Dust made a halo around him. The bent silver star was gone from his chest. Tolliver still clenched it, stunned inside, but Malachi wore authority like a second skin. He didn't need metal to kill. "Fire," he said mildly. 3 rifles cracked from the upper windows, splinters jumping from the rail at Ruth's feet. Mallory flinched, then fired. His first shot tore Vale's hat brim. Woodpecker bursts answered from Vale's men, chewing the porch post where Mallory had just been. He tumbled behind a barrel, pale as paper. "Judge," Kane barked, glancing back into the carnage. "Call it." Tolliver stood frozen in the court doorway, badge in one hand, paper in the other, mouth working like a poppet fish thrown up on the bank. His lips formed invalid, but no sound came out. The rider who'd escorted him lifted his long rifle and put a clean hole through the center of a window muzzle. The gunman jerked backward with a yelp. "Enough," the rider said, voice flat. "This is a slaughterhouse." "Paid meat talks now," Vale called, wry. He pointed, nothing as crude as a shout. A maestro flicking a baton. 2 rifles swung to Ruth, 2 to Lena, 1 to Ephraim, where he coughed at Kane's knee. Kane felt the hinge in the moment, felt it in bone. The town would learn one lesson now, or another. He dragged the chain across the floor in a bright scrape and turned back into the courthouse long enough to scoop the star from the boards. He didn't pin it. He held it high. "Bootjack Ridge." His voice hit the ceiling and came down in the rafters, sharp as nails. "You want law, or you want a leash?" You watched him buy a judge with mind stamp paper. You watched him cut a man's breath to prove a point. This star don't mean a thing unless you say what it means. He pitched the badge to Ruth. Her hands took it like it was hot iron, and something went through the crowd. No cheer, no roar, a pulse. Women pressed forward instead of back. Men straightened without guns in their fists. You could hear boots coming from farther down the street. Shopkeepers who hadn't come at first and were now coming because everyone else was. Vale read that pulse, too. His smile thinned to a line a knife would like. He stepped out onto the top step, hands spread as if calming a horse. "Citizens," he said, "a relic with bloody hands and a widow with papers don't make a state. Law makes a state, and I have it." "Show it," Kane said. Vale's eyes flicked to Tolliver. The judge looked at the badge in Ruth's white knuckles and finally found his voice. "That appointment," he said hoarsely, "bears no gubernatorial seal. The Black Rock Assay Office is not. The government," Ruth finished for him, louder. "It's a mine." A ripple moved through the crowd, the way prairie wind runs fingers through wheat. The rider's voice came again, low. "Put the guns down, Vale." Malachi's gaze slid to him with a new weight. "Hold your tongue, Pinkerton." So, not merely a hire, a detective with his own oath. The rider's jaw worked. His gaze raked Vale the way a whetstone rakes steel. "Don't dress murder in paper," the Pinkerton said. Vale laughed once, bright, mean. "Watch close," he told the town. He raised his right hand. "We'll dress it in daylight then. Dual law. No rifles, no paper. Just the two men who claimed to carry it." Heads turned like weather vanes. Dust eddied between the two figures, the man in the black duster with iron on his wrists, and the smiling thief who had set whole lives on fire. "Unchain him," Vale said, "or your town will watch him choke on a cuff." No one moved. Mallory rose from behind the barrel, pale and fierce, and crossed to Kane. His hands shook so hard the first key missed the hole. The second found it. The cuff sprang, iron-kissed wood when it fell. Kane flexed hands that looked like they'd been soaking in blood. Only chain burn and rope burn spoke there. Ruth stepped close and pressed something into Kane's palm. The badge. It was warm now, as if it had taken a pulse. "Much obliged," Kane said softly. He lifted it, looked at the notch one last time, and then in front of everyone, he closed his fist and bent the star clean across his knee. The sound it made was not much. Tin crying a little, but it was a bell in that square. Every face heard it. Kane let the bent star fall into the dust between them. "Law ain't a trinket," he said. "It's a choice you make when it costs." Vale's mouth ticked up. "So be it." They walked out into the street as if a wind had seized them both by the coats. The town opened, porches emptying, shadows coughing up men with their breath held. The Gallows stood behind like a tall, quiet witness. Sunlight came level, hard and copper, turning dust to gold motes and the ropes to black lines drawn across the sky. Someone stopped the bell mid-pull. The rope hung like a frozen tongue. Kane took his mark in the center dirt. He shrugged out of his duster and let it fall. The Colt sat at his hip, pearl grip scuffed by years of thinking about killing. He rolled his shoulder and felt the bruise under the bone complain. Vale mirrored him down the street, 10 paces out, coat flaring, hands empty and easy, smile fixed at preacher pleasant. "No rifles," Vale said without turning. The muzzles at the windows dipped, but they didn't go away. "No paper," Vale added, glancing a knife at Tolliver. The judge folded his parchment with shaking hands and sat on it like a nervous hen. "Justice," Kane said, almost to himself. "What's that?" Vale teased. "Something that rides whether you pin it or not." They faced each other with 20 paces between, the bent star lying crooked in the dust, halfway like a broken compass. "Count," Vale said. "By who?" Kane asked. "By the boy," Ruth answered from the steps. her voice steadier than anyone's. She set a hand on her son's shoulder. The child looked from one man to the other with dark, serious eyes and nodded. He raised a shaking hand, each finger a second. 1. Silence swallowed the town. 2. Somewhere a horse stamped and rattled a bridle. The rope at the gallows creaked once as if remembering work. 3. Kane's heartbeat slowed to the metronome he knew. The brim of Vale's hat cut a crescent from the sun. The world shrank to 2 hands and a distance. 4. The Pinkerton took his hat off. Tolliver took his glasses off. Mallory took his fear off and put both hands on his revolver, finger outside the guard, learning. 5. Kane's palm brushed Pearl. His wife's words moved in him like water under ice. Hope for those who can't run. Lena stood by the rail, knife bright, eyes on him the way a river watches a bridge. 6. Vale's eyes flickered once. To the windows. Kane saw it. Ruth saw it. The town saw more than it had any right to see. 7. Ephraim Pike got his breath back and stood, rope welt glowing like a new brand at his throat. He didn't speak. He squared his shoulders. 8. Kane drew in a slow breath of rope and dust and sage and old grief. The taste of fire 10 years gone was still in it. 9. Both men's fingers curled. The word cracked in the boy's mouth, because a rifle barrel slid back up in the courthouse window, dark and eager, cutting the sun. Nan! Kane moved. Vale moved. The star lay between them, bent and bloodless. Dawn edged the clouds in brass, as Sheriff Kane climbed the steps of the abandoned courthouse. Wind pushed grit along the boards in a dry hiss. The gallows still stood out back, old timber, new rope, silhouetted like a cross against the paling sky. He paused beneath the lintel, felt the pearl on his Colt bite, cold against his ribs, and let the silver badge spin once in his fingers. It flashed, then stilled. Inside, townsfolk crowded the warped pews, ranchers with hat brims bent from sun, wives with shawls pulled tight, boys too young to be where justice broke its fast. At the front table, Judge Ellison Fitch arranged his papers with a slow, oiled calm. His white cuffs were bright as bones. Beside him, Deputy Lyle Craddock stood easy as a wolf near a lamb pen. The stranger, Jonah Pike, waited at the center aisle, hat off, a ledger under his arm and a lamplight resolve in his tired eyes. "All of you know me," Fitch said, voice smooth as a poker chip. "All of you know Sheriff Kane. Today, we restore order. The law must not blink." Kane crossed the aisle, boots thumping hollow along the floor where juries had once shuffled and sworn. He studied the judge, the ring on Fitch's hand engraved with the territorial seal, the ink-smudged thumb, the plain gold on his waistcoat that didn't match the lean of a man who pretended thrift. He looked past him to the window where dust wrote thin lines through sunlight. For a heartbeat, he saw two ghosts there, his wife and boy like morning fog. Then they were gone, as they always were. Jonah stepped forward. "Order will keep, Judge." His voice was low, made for quiet rooms and hard truths, but it should stand on something better than lies. He set the ledger down and opened it, so the whole room could see rows of careful figures, names in a clerk's neat hand. Railroad bribes routed through your office, bounties signed for men who never drew a gun, men Sheriff Kane buried because of your orders. And this, he lifted a sealed letter, broken carefully at one end. Your instructions to Craddock, to make a widow of Kane and a lesson of his son, if the sheriff wouldn't play tame. A horse stamped outside. The room breathed in, then out. Craddock bristled. "He's a liar with long papers." "Read them," Jonah said, sliding the letter to the front bench. Fitch didn't touch it. More tricks from a drifter who stole a badge and called it duty. Kane drifted a palm along the table's scarred edge. He felt the notch where some past defendant had carved a cross with a pocket knife, perhaps to mark the place where confession ends and rope begins. He set his badge on that mark. It sounded like a coin being counted. "Law ain't always justice," he said. His voice filled the rafters, rough as pine smoke. "But justice rides with me." The judge's smile thinned. "Sheriff, you forget yourself." "No," Kane said. "I remember too well." Jonah lifted a small leather book, black, cracked along the spine. "Your black docket, Judge. Side accounts. The Pinkerton receipts." Craddock split. "Careful, boy," Craddock growled, shifting his coat back from the butt of his pistol. Kane's gaze slid to the back wall where the iron cell still yawned. Bars cold as creek water, a lock big enough to swallow a man's future. He measured distances. Window to bench, bench to judge, judge to deputy, deputy to crowd. Wind moaned under the door like an animal dreaming. "This ledger proves you stole men's lives with a pen," Jonah said, voice iron now. "It proves you sold this town to the tracks and called it progress. And it proves why a boy named Matthew Kane died on a night when no law watched." The room tilted. A woman's hand flew to her mouth. Someone whispered, "God forgive us." Fitch's face went pale as old ash. "You'll hang for that," Craddock snarled, and drew. 3 sounds cracked at once. Craddock's pistol clearing leather, the sheriff's colt barking like lightning in close timber, and a woman's scream tunneling through the heat. Kane's shot took the deputy in the wrist and spun the gun across the floorboards. Craddock stumbled, cursing, blood ribboning his hand. Jonah had already kicked the fallen pistol under the bench. Kane stepped forward and put his barrel on Craddock's cheek, close enough that the metal's chill made the man flinch. "You raise iron in this house again," Kane said, quiet as snowfall, "and I lay you down for good." A hush fell so deep, the wind could be heard moving dust along the sill. Fitch found his voice. "Murder, assault, seize them." No one moved. Not even the bailiff, who stared at the black docket as if it were a coiled snake. In the back, the blacksmith squared his shoulders. A rancher with a storm-cut face edged his daughter behind him. Faces that had been gray with fear were hardening. "Take his iron," Kane ordered, without looking away from Craddock. 2 farmers stepped forward, trembling but determined, and disarmed the deputy, then bound him with a length of trace chain. Fitch's eyes gleamed. "You think you'll get me to the gallows on the word of a stranger and a grief-crazed lawman?" Jonah slid a second packet onto the table, telegrams stamped with federal seals. "You'll walk in chains to the railhead, Judge. The circuit court is waiting." Fitch laughed, brittle as frost. "The court is mine." "Not today," Jonah said. "Your patron's been called east. The wind's changed." The judge's hand drifted under his papers. Kane saw the twitch before the movement, the old tell, the one men give when their souls find no purchase. He fired as Fitch's derringer cleared the table. The little gun belched smoke and spit a bullet into the molding. Kane's round hammered the wood inches from Fitch's wrist, and splinters leapt like sparks. The derringer clattered to the plank, and the judge's fingers shook open like a man who'd touched fire. "By God and by jury," Kane said, You'll answer proper." He holstered his Colt without taking his eyes off the judge. "Stand up." Fitch's chin lifted in practiced outrage, then fell, a puppet with a cut string. He stood. Jonah spun the ledger toward the crowd again, reading names, widows left thin as kindling, ranches carved up for survey stakes, an Apache girl sold on a sealed writ. With each name, another set of shoulders in the room straightened. The law wasn't a paper now. It was breath and sinew. Kane nodded to the bailiff. "Unlock the cell." The old man swallowed. Keys rasped like a snake in dry grass. The door swung on a slow iron groan. Kane guided Fitch forward, one hand between the judge's shoulders. At the threshold, Fitch paused and tried for dignity. "You'll regret this, Sheriff." Kane's jaw worked once. "I already regret too much." He set Fitch inside. Chains rattled. The door rang shut. The crowd exhaled, a low animal sound of something let go after years of clenching. Outside, the sun finally cracked the cloud bank and laid a coin of light on the gallows beam. Dust swirled through it like river water. The stranger closed the black docket, thumb resting in the crease as if he were marking his place in a long, unruly book. "You could have shot him dead," he said. "I could have," Kane answered. "Why didn't you?" The sheriff looked through the bars at the judge, the man who had signed his family into the ground. His fingers brushed the badge on the rail, and for a breath, he saw his boy's small hand lay on his, steadying the spin. He picked the star up and weighed it. "Law ain't always justice." The words tasted like iron. He pinned the badge back on. The catch clicked. In that small sound rode the day's hardest choice. "Because the gallows isn't where I prove I'm right," he said, half to Jonah, half to the ghosts that had ridden him to this hall. "It's where I prove I'm still a man." A murmur rose, approval, relief, maybe even something like hope. The blacksmith cleared his throat. "Sheriff, what becomes of us now?" Kane looked over the crowd, the same faces that had looked away when they should have seen, the same hands that had trembled when they should have held. Dust hung in the golden light, like fine ash. "Now," he said, "we start counting honest again." From the cell, Fitch's voice slithered out, thin with fury. "This isn't done." Kane turned, steel-gray eyes cutting through the shadow. "No," he said, "it's just begun." He tipped his hat brim to Jonah Pike. The stranger nodded once, then set the ledger beneath his arm like a Bible a man means to carry a long way. Outside, a gust tugged at the noose and set it turning. The loop swung slow and silent, a wheel returning to its mark and missing it. The courthouse door banged open on new wind. Kane stepped into the light, the badge bright against his dust-worn coat, and the town followed. The courthouse emptied into a day that looked almost clean. Somewhere a meadowlark tried a few bright notes, as if testing whether song could hold in air rubbed raw by gun smoke and fear. Kane felt the badge's weight against his heart, and the counterweight of everything it could not fix. The rope would have been easier. Killing was quick. It did not demand the long, humiliating labor of repair, but the law, when it remembered who it served, asked a harder witness. It asked him not to take what he wanted most, even when the wanting was righteous and hot. He had stood at the edge of two graves all his life. One dug for the man who believed in oaths, the other for the man who believed in revenge. Today he had stepped back from both. Justice had ridden with him, but it hadn't ridden alone. The town had found its voice. A stranger had risked his neck to tell the truth. Even the iron cell had done its plain, honest work. Maybe that was the lesson the badge spun to tell. You can't be justice by yourself. You can only be its first rider and hope the rest of the posse shows. Kane raised his face to the sun. In his mind, his boy laughed, free of ropes and orders, and his wife's hand rested light on his arm. "I'm trying," he told them. The wind carried the words away without answer, as wind always did. He cinched his duster, checked the Colt at his hip, and stepped back into the street where right and wrong argued in the dust. The badge was just a star. The choice would always be the work.